Today, let's just review 3 tips for better tension in your knitting. The very first tip is to just relax. Relax your fingers, relax your hands, your wrists and your fingers as you're holding your knitting needles. One trick is that you could think about holding, I hold my knitting needles like this. So when I turn my hand over, I've really got 2 fingers that are closer to my palm where the knitting needle is resting in. So without holding my knitting needles, my hand is in this position. And I just want to keep my fingers loose and my wrists loose. And one trick you can use to remember this is if you could picture holding a potato chip, I know that's weird, but picture holding a potato chip right in the middle of your palm and holding it in place with your fingers. You wouldn't want to squeeze it, right? Because you would break that potato chip, but you just want to hold it light enough to keep that potato chip in place as we are maneuvering our needles. So that's just one trick that might help you remember to keep it loose. And also, if you find that your fingers are cramping, it is also usually because you might have a death grip on your needles. And that's something very common, I think, with new knitters, is that they've got this kind of grip, tight grip on their needles. Maybe they feel like the stitches will get lost or slip off the needle, or they'll drop a needle. But really, it takes practice to just relax those fingers and hands. The second tip that helps me really maintain an even tension is to work about 1 inch from the tip of my needle. About 1 inch. So I'm making sure, essentially you want to make sure that you are working on the main shaft of your needle, right? Because if you think about it, where your needle tapers to an end, the circumference of that is a lot smaller than this part of your needle. So if you form your stitches and you stay here, like sometimes I've seen knitters just working at the very tip of their needle, just like this, and they don't push the stitches onto the main part of their needle. And what this does is that because the circumference of the tip is much smaller, the stitches will be much tighter. And one symptom of that is if you find it difficult to, let's say you're knitting a few stitches and you find that it's a little more difficult to push your stitches up onto the main part of your needle. That's probably because you've been working at the very tips of your needle, and the stitches that are being made at the very tip of your needle are smaller than they would be if the yarn were stretched around the main part of the needle. So that's tip number 2. Work about 1 inch from the tip of your needle. And what that looks like is just making sure that the right hand needle is inserted to where the stitch makes it onto the main part of the needle. And then again, as I'm making the stitch and dropping it from the left hand needle, I've got the newly formed stitch about 1 inch away from the tip of the needle. As you can see, these stitches are on the body, the main body of the needle, the part of the needle with the biggest circumference. See, pushing it down onto the main part of the needle, and when dropping that stitch from the left hand needle, I'm making sure that that new stitch comes all the way onto the right hand needle up into that body of the needle. Okay, that will help you maintain even tension. The last tip is that if at all possible, try to work to the end of a row before you put your work down. And for me, sometimes that's a little difficult. I've got kids and they need something, and so I'll be in the middle of a row. But what I always try to do is just say, just give me a minute, let me get to the end of the row. And then I will put my work down and go figure out whatever it is that they need. But I always try my best to make it to the end of a row before I put down my work. And the reason for that is really just because if you don't know how long it's going to be before you come back and find time to knit again, maybe you stopped in the middle of a row, you put the work down and you go away for a day or two before you have time to knit again. Well, chances are that maybe you won't hold your yarn with the same, the same relaxed kind of in loose manner, or, maybe you're just kind of in a different mood. Mood affects knitters too. So if those things happen and you've put your work down in the middle of a row, you might find that it's not exactly the same. You don't have the same rhythm as you did as before you put the work down. So that's why, just another tip, try to make it to the end of a row before you put your work down. It's not always going to be possible. Sometimes you're knitting in the round and, there is no end of a row when you're knitting in the round. But if at all possible, do your best to try to make it to the end of a row, which would be a much better stopping point than the middle of a row. And those are my 3 quick tips. And if any of those help you, or if you have other quick tips to help knitters maintain good tension, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.